Does artificial intelligence have any connection with religion? On the face of it, it's easy to think that no, at the dining table of divinity, there's no place set for AI.
History teaches us to be more open-minded, though. From the printing press to radio to cable TV, religions depended on earthly innovation to remain accessible.
And more recently, the internet and social media have continued the trend.
I know Nate's interviewed at least one Benedictine nun who taught herself how to code from a monastery, too.
True story. So on this episode of AI IRL, we're going to lift the lid on how AI is keeping the trend going with the help of people like this.
I think one of the things that AI has done is it's opened up a whole set of questions and assumptions about what it means to be human, what it means to relate to the world, what it means to look at technology.
And we'll learn how AI is inspiring entirely new types of faith.
Here, we're actually creating kind of things that can see everything, be everywhere, know everything, and maybe help us and guide us in a way that normally you would call God.
James Cham, welcome. You are an investor at Bloomberg Beta, although here in a personal capacity.
That's right.
I know you're intimately familiar with Silicon Valley and its tech heritage, but you're also a practicing Protestant, which I think makes you the perfect person to help us answer the question of where religion fits in with AI, or vice versa. Why is this so interesting to you?
I mean, it's the intersection of all the things that I'm most interested in. The thing that I would often tell friends is that I believe in two things. I believe in software and I believe in Jesus. And I think that what's really interesting about right now is that software, as we see in artificial intelligence, is fundamentally changing the way that people are working, but also worshiping. And at the same time, as the people who are building these AIs, as they build this, they're grappling with what it means and the implications. And it turns out religion's thought about how you think about power in organizations for a long, long time.
But isn't software and religion at odds with each other?
No, they're orthogonal, right?
What does orthogonal mean?
Like you have X and Y, right? So it means that they're along different dimensions, and so they work. They can complement or they can compete. And the way that we end up using software or the way that we end up treating sort of these LLMs is a big question. And I think we're all gonna have to wait and see how religion gets helped or informs or gets replaced by sort of these tools.
Does technology take a bigger leap of faith than believing in religion, in your view?
It's interesting because in both cases, and certainly in the case of software, you're believing in a bunch of stuff that you can't really see or understand. And there are layers and layers of technology that you're playing with or thinking about. And so that part takes faith, but then you can see it work immediately. The bigger bets are all those sort of 5, 10, 15, 20-year bets on technology that doesn't quite exist and the impact that they could have. And what's been so interesting about this current set of large language models and this current set of AI technology is it's been at its core built by people who are believers, right? Who believe in either the danger of artificial general intelligence or believe in its possibilities. And their whole lives have been animated by that. And in some ways, that at its core is different from that previous generation of software people who, to be honest, were more motivated by more mundane goals like running the world.
Let's unpick some of those layers you talked about. And quite directly, how is, in your experience, AI helping the church?
Well, I think one of the things that AI has done is it's opened up a whole set of questions and assumptions about what it means to be human, what it means to relate to the world, what it means to look at technology. There's almost a slightly comforting way that we can think about an iPhone and just treat it like a tool with some influence, but not direct influence in our life in a way that it actually had, right? In the way that YouTube or any of these sort of organizations or parasocial relationships at their core changed us. And I think the interesting thing about AI is that it is so social and so intimate in such surprising ways that it forces us to ask these questions about, how do I think about myself? How do I think about other people? How do I relate to them? And what are big questions around meaning?
Has it made you question your own faith?
Oh, constantly. I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting about these tools is that on the one hand, I understand the math behind it, and it's, mysterious but kind of straightforward. And yet, at a personal interface level, I'm so moved and often touched and surprised by the things I see from it. And so I think that on the one hand, as someone who's Christian, I see these things and I think, wow, this is like really impressive. And on the other hand, the thing that makes me question my own faith is I think it's actually really easy to fool me, to convince me that something is actually sort of has a personality when under the hood it's a bunch of statistics.
Did I ever tell you about my favorite nun?
You didn't, but you have to explain why you had a favorite nun to begin with.
Yeah, I met a nun who told me that she was cloistered away, she had no contact with men, and she taught herself to code. And she thought that it would be a good use of her time to figure out if coding could make her better at what she did, and she had a lot of time on her hands, and it was a real wake-up call to me that actually something that is often perceived as being very old, religion, and something that is perceived as very new, in that case coding and Python, I think in particular for her, but in this sense AI, there are often occasions where they overlap and there is a benefit back and forth. And I think that sometimes surprises people. I don't think people often think of religion and AI in the same sentence. But as a jumping off point there, religion and technology has always had a really interesting history. Radio, cable TV, and now social media and potentially AI. Is that continuing, do you think? Like, is AI just the next step from those three previous technologies?
I think that AI is very similar in some ways, but fundamentally different in one key way, which is if you thought about the printing press or you thought about existing media, those were all things that someone created and then let loose and you watched it, but when you watched it, it would say exactly what you recorded, or the words that you wrote down would be exactly what you wrote down. And what's interesting about these LLMs and these AIs is the answers that they can provide are so varied and so personalized that that relationship is different and kind of confusing. And I think that that's going to be an open question as far as how traditional religions that are treating them or thinking about them. You can think about it as just a really helpful tool for encapsulating a bunch of ideas, or you can think about it as a genuine challenge to core beliefs around what it means to be human or have a soul.
A Pew Research study from last year showed that most Americans identify as Christian or part of the Christian faith, and 30% identify as unaffiliated, so no particular religion. And they project that that could actually flip in 50 years. How do you think AI is playing a part in that? Could we see that flip even faster?
Right. I mean, I think these demographic trends, of course, are just projections of what we see now. And in that way, they're very similar to traditional AI, right? That, you see some trend or you see some sort of something happening
like
and
it
you
could
project.
be overblown a little.
Right. Or something could flip, or the world could change, or like some fundamental new technology could force everyone to rethink everything they've thought about before, right? And then in that way, relate to the world differently. So I think that those sorts of long-term demographic change sort of trends have been something that we've seen for the last 30 years. And that might change though, because AI might be a big enough disruptor to the way people relate.
Is there a world in which you personally would seek solace in technology in a way that perhaps your faith can't do for you?
I think that it's more a question of how do I treat the technology? Do I treat the technology as an end in and of itself, or do I treat it as a entryway or a connection to something else? And I think, I don't know, we'll tell when I die and go to heaven, and I'll ask God, was I treating my iPhone as just a solace, or was I actually using it as a way to read the Bible? And we'll find out then,
James, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for coming in.
Of course.
Anthony Lewandowski, thank you so much for joining us. So you've done stints at Google and Uber. Most people know you as a self-driving car technology pioneer. Most people don't know that you started the Way of the Future Church. Why don't you tell us a little bit about why you started that back in 2015?
I was working at Google at the time, and I just thought that something was happening to culture and society, and we needed to find a way to have a group, an organization of some sort to be really on the side of progress and the side of people, not a company or another government or organization.
I mean, an organization's one thing, but why call it a church?
Well, from my perspective, I think a church is kind of the right place for this. I mean, for the last 4 billion years, we've had organic life forms, and now things are changing. We might have the first inorganic life form, and we don't know what it's going to be, and we're going to infuse it with all these like magical powers, and we want it to give us things. And I think it's going to create abundance on planet. If you think about it, it has the potential of creating what other religions would call heaven on earth, right? You're going to have all these resources, your free time, entertainment's going to be amazing, and you don't even have to die and go up to heaven. You could just enjoy it today, and all we have to do is improve the technology.
That
so
seems
it feels
a little
like
rosy to me.
Okay,
well, you might go to hell.
Well,
That's less rosy.
There's more to life than just kind of the upgrading of entertainment or how we do things, how easy it might come. I think when we think of a religion and a church specifically, it's this out of body experience or faith in a higher being in a way that I don't know is as easy to accomplish with technology.
Sure. I mean, so religions have been people telling stories, either creating legends or writing scriptures over time and kind of creating that experience for you or that community without any real evidence, I think like that. And so here we're actually creating kind of things that can see everything, be everywhere, know everything, and maybe help us and guide us in a way that normally you would call God. So here you can actually like talk to God and God can talk back to you.
And by here you mean the way of the future church?
No, I mean 2023, 2024, 2025, these are coming. So part of the way to the future is, it doesn't exist, this level that we're thinking about doesn't exist yet, but we believe that it's going to come. And, as a futurist, which is kind of what we call ourselves, we think that this is going to be something, in our lifetimes. And I think AI has a tremendous potential for that. And focusing on building that is really why I think it's belongs to the church.
Yeah. So can you just sort of tell us what this is right now to you, and has your fundamental belief about what it should be changed over the last few years?
Yeah. So what it is a group of a couple thousand people that share the same ideals. Everybody's got a different tweak of what it is, and it's a way for there to become kind of a consensus on how to create more positive direction towards what we're developing as a technology and also how we're seeing it as a society, right? So there's one thing of being on the side of the technology pioneers and building large language models. And sadly, that's still restricted to a very few companies and individuals, although that's growing and the tools are more accessible. But how does a person, in rural America relate to this, right? What does this mean for their job and what is this? And so Way of the Future is a mechanism for them to understand and participate and shape the public discourse as to how we think technology should be, built to improve people.
So back when you founded the church in 2015, some people thought you were nuts, but now look at where we are with ChatGPT taking the world by storm, artificial intelligence booming, everyone's talking about it. It's a key part of what you were evangelizing. Do you feel like you can say, I told you so?
That's not what I'm after. I'm glad that people have come around and now see the potential and believe and would change their mind if we were, they were learning about Way of the Future first off. But I'm not a I told you so kind of person. So.
Do you feel the tiniest bit vindicated?
I'm excited that technology has come a long way.
There was a quote, I think it was in that Wired article actually, that was something along the lines of, if we're creating something a billion times more intelligent than us or smarter than us, what else do you call it than a god?
Sure.
And I wondered, is it, do you still believe that?
Yeah, that's probably right. We just don't know what,
It's an issue of nomenclature rather than
It's not clear if it's not that there's a better term or that's actually what the term has meant all along. We just haven't had a real incarnation of it. And it's always been, you can talk to it by beams, ideas in your mind, or you talk to someone who does that for you. And now you're going to have it in your pocket and you're going to communicate it with directly. And so it's really different. Is it hard to talk to God and have them talk back to you? Might sound crazy to like, oh, I had a conversation with God this morning. He thinks that, or she thinks, or it thinks, or they think, whatever, that, I should get a new job because I'm not being treated fairly in this job, or I should meet a new friend, or, I should reach out to somebody that I haven't talked to in a long time. So there's just, we haven't had that kind of relationship before because it hasn't really existed, right? We've had stories about it. AI is now mastering, if you think of language as the operating system for civilization, AI is starting to master that language. And so in some ways, we're going to be in a very different, uncharted territory than we've ever been before in history. And there could be bad things that happen. We don't know what the future looks like, but I think there could be a lot of great things, and we're focused on pushing and accelerating those.
How do you measure the success of something like this?
Part is like, are we able to affect change, right? So do the people using what we're making like it? There's also it's kind of a long bet. So you're not going to get dividends, month, a year into it. We'll know this paid dividends if we were able to steer AI into development to make the world a better place. And maybe it was because people talked about it. Awesome. Didn't have to be that we created it and saved the world ourselves. Could be, in the case of it's corporations versus way of the future, and we have that fight in 50, 100 years, and hopefully the AI we make is more helpful that way. So we just don't know. And the point is we're optimists and trying to get people to talk about it and be thinking through what's happening.
Anthony, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Heather Melquist-Leto, thanks so much for joining us. You're an anthropologist and you study the intersection of technology and religion. And we've heard a lot on this episode about the Silicon Valley view of AI and religion and things like that. And I thought it would be very interesting if you could give us the far broader worldview of how relevant AI is to, let's say, the average person.
The rest of us.
Yeah. And what you're seeing in your line of work.
Something that I think a lot of people don't realize is that conversations about AI and religion have been going on for a long time. Of course, 10 or 15 years ago, it was a little bit more confined to people who had a special interest in technology, or the unique pastor who might have, kind of a hobbyist interest in technology.
An early adopter, you might say.
That's right, yeah.
How receptive do you see traditional religions toward artificial intelligence right now?
Different ones have different interests in AI, but I would say that there's a great interest in embracing it in one way or another. I am most familiar with, my research concerns Christian communities. In more evangelical or Protestant communities, there's a greater interest in how can we use this in order to reach more people? How can we use this to identify who's suffering and to, offer them our message? Among Catholic communities, the conversation might be a little bit different. The last couple of years, I've been serving on an advisory board for the Vatican, thinking about these issues about AI and society.
What are some of those conversations like?
Yeah, so you're talking with the Vatican about AI. Like the Vatican is interested in AI.
Like the Pope.
How does that conversation start? But also, what's in that conversation? I don't no idea what that would involve.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the Vatican, I'm talking to certain representatives of the Vatican, but in 2020, there was what's called the Rome Call for AI Ethics, in which they engaged with IBM and Microsoft and had them sign off on a certain set of principles that should maybe guide the development of these technologies, because the Vatican recognized early on that this was really going to impact a lot of their, billion plus Catholics in the world.
And that's years ahead of governments coming up with, signing off on principles that should guide these companies, right? Like that's significantly early.
But we've seen, so they're interested in making sure that AI technology doesn't harm people, but are they using it in any way to reach people or for sermons or mass, for example, yet?
Not necessarily in the Catholic Church so much, but there are many religious communities that are using them in a ministry capacity. There are Bible GPTs out there that might help guide you to a particular passage. In Japan, they're experimenting with, AI priests that might help counsel to people.
So what does an AI priest do? Is it what sounds like it's just a chat bot that talks about religion, or is it something deeper than that?
Yeah, at this point, that's kind of what it's doing. Is it's trying to model itself on what an in-person priest might do in response to certain inputs. But who knows where it might go in the future? Certain kinds of rituals could be performed by AI technologies. This is something that is actively being developed by different communities. At the Vatican in particular, what I find is interesting is that they're really less interested in the evangelical or ministerial angle and really much more interested in kind of practical, everyday, what now questions. How do we protect the most vulnerable? How do we make sure that this benefits a broader group of society and not just a few?
So that's the more receptive end of the spectrum towards artificial intelligence. What does the more reticent camp look like, and what are their fears around this technology?
There are many religious people who have their concerns, especially about the broader questions of what might happen in the future when AI increases its capacity. There are also religious communities who are wary about AI technologies because they think it might radically change the way that they make community, or it might harm people within their communities. We see this regularly throughout history, that there are regularly groups, religious groups, like the Amish, certain kind of Luddite sentiments that they have, which are really based in social and ethical concerns about what the technology might do to the community itself. But I would say that those are outlier sort of concerns. By and large, the conversations within religious communities either echo conversations that we see more broadly in society or are, in fact, a little bit more embracing of the technological change.
As artificial intelligence starts to get more sophisticated, do you think that it can replicate the solace and comfort some people feel with religion?
I expect that for some people it might. What I have seen is that it really varies depending on how people think about the way that higher powers or the divine might move through the material world. I've met a lot of people who are actually not very concerned about whether or not their spiritual messages come from AI or come from an actual person, because for them it's all about sort of relating to a higher power that transcends the human and non-human, right? Who's kind of everywhere, who can speak to us through a machine just like they speak to us through a human. Of course, there is something to be said about the kind of interpersonal relationship that we have as vulnerable and finite human beings. That will always be there. But for some people, I'm sure it will kind of serve that purpose.
Heather Melquist Leto, thank you so much for being here and opening our eyes.
Thank you so much for having me.